everything that's running, and you hopped off yesterday, Maxie, and picked him third.
Yes, well, Bruce, the first time that Mahogany raced at Randwick this campaign, I did liken certain aspects of his character to Kingston Town. I'd just like to say there's one aspect he doesn't compare, and that's consistency.
Didn't he give some class to a race that needed it yesterday, though? I mean, he won like a top weight for age horse. I know he had everything going for him, but it reminded me of Red Anchor, his acceleration away from them, and that's a pretty big compliment. Oh,
he's an outstanding racehorse. I think he's an outstanding sprinter. It obviously extends to 2,500 metres at the tempo that the Derby was run yesterday, but a very, very good racehorse.
I've got to say one thing, I'm glad he didn't run in the Gadsden, as you were suggesting last week, Max, that they should try him as a sprinter.
Would have bolted him. Now, I base that on the fact that you'll note the other Sydney horse won the 3-year-old race.
Dancing Dynamite.
Yes, yeah, and note the times, very little in the times.
0.1.
And Mahogany is a better 3-year-old sprinter.
Oh, Maxie.
I think Mahogany did prove yesterday that the Derby is won by class acts. It's a classic race, and you don't necessarily have to be a stayer. He may prove to be one, but he had won 3 Group 1 races going into the Classic, and yesterday his class told by 5 lengths, the easiest Derby in memory.
Well, you think it was 5 lengths? I thought it was longer.
So did I, actually. I thought it was a crimpy 5 lengths.
I should say one thing. I mean, G Hall's ride was brilliant. I thought G Cookson and Waikika Mukau was waiting for another lap, and G Childs had drawn 8 or 9 on Battle Hawk.
I think that's the nature of the beast with Waikika Mukau. He's
just a run.
But doesn't it, Bruce, doesn't it depend on the machinery that you've got underneath you? Like, one was in a Mercedes-Benz, the others were, well, they might have been on, I don't want to be too severe, but perhaps more in the Morris Minor category.
Oh, the Waikika Mukau I saw at the Furlong Making Ground was much better than the Morris Minor. Let's have a look at the Derby anyway. G Hall smoking the pipe on the turn.
Mukau is still well back as they commence the run around the home turner. Pride of Rancho in charge at the 600-metre mark, about to be tackled by Carla Max and Kendall Star on the outsider. And Mahogany's moved off the fence now to go up on the outside and tackle these leaders as they set sail for Homer. And Mahogany over on the outside has dashed to the front of the Derby with 400 to go. Mahogany is the leader. In second place is Carla Max, followed by McGuan from a long way back. Down the outside, Kendall Star lets cut loose, and back behind the Battle Hawk is struggling. But Mahogany with a big break coming down past the 200, looked all over a winner. He's well clear. In second place now, Waikika Mukau is coming from the rear, and battling on well is Sheld, who's getting through in the centre, but it's Mahogany. Mahogany wins it by 5 lengths. Second home is Sheld. Third, Waikika Mukau ahead of Regal Artery.
I guess the other lucky man yesterday was Kerry Packer, because a month ago he wasn't an owner, and suddenly he's received all the headlines in the world as being an owner of Mahogany.
Yes, he came in late, and I think the bookmakers felt his presence yesterday. One bookmaker paid out $360,000 on 2 bets, and another $200,000 on only 2 bets on the Derby winner.
They've done this in the past, so Lloyd and Kerry Packer, haven't they, Lloyd?
Yes, I don't think Mr. Packer would be in front on his racing horses at this stage, but nevertheless, with Mahogany, perhaps he'll get there.
Well, after the race, Keith Hillier caught up with Lee Friedman, and he was absolutely delighted, as you could imagine.
Lee Friedman, who had gone so close in 2 previous derbies, today there was never a doubt, Lee.
Oh, when he kicked him there, Keithy, I just said, go for home, you good thing, you know, and I was just wrapped around.
Have you seen an easier win in a major race at Group 1 level, let alone your own horses?
Yeah, I think the key to the whole thing was that he drew the one barrier, and he just travelled so beautifully in the run. He always thought that if he could quicken in the straight, he was going to be right in the race. You know?
You always knew that you had something special in Mahogany, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I think his first up run in Sydney alerted a lot of people to the fact he was a high-class horse. He had a bit of a flat spot for a couple of runs, and got him back to Melbourne. I think he appreciated being home, and next thing we won the Guineas and the Derby. So I think he's a champion 3-year-old, and he should train on to be a top-class 4-year-old.
Will he be here this week, next year, maybe on the first Tuesday in November?
I tell you what, the way you ran that out, you wouldn't discount that.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Lee Friedman won his first Victoria Derby. Let's now go to the Gadsden. Ali Shan coming with a great run to just tip out Curltrees.
Now racing down towards the course proper, about 700 metres left to go. Gold Brace on the outside, Royal Discard of the leaders. Mukhtar close handy, Awesome Force in behind them. Prince Acumen, Curltrees is working his way to the picture. Primacy's rider's lost his cap, and Ellie Shan further back, not related. Big Dreams nowhere to go. Burst down the outside and over on the extreme outside. The grandstand rail. Draft Choice got a check, and the leader Sportsworks is nicely clear of Gitana, who's starting to run on with about 300 metres left to go. Gold Brace is being tackled by Curltrees and Ellie Shan, and over on the outside Sportsworks is the leader. Here's a great go, Ellie Shan, Curltrees. Ellie Shan doing a bit the better. Ellie Shan, I'd say, has won it from Curltrees. and Primacy on the inside, and the two very wide on the track. Sportsworks and
second of Greg Hall's treble. He was the outstanding rider yesterday. David Hayes, the winning trainer. A typical straight 6 big sprint at Flemington. Put the blanket over and there's about 10 horses underneath.
Yes, Alishan had been struggling to find form of late, but he is a straight 6 specialist like his elder brother, Grandiose. I think they've won about 15 races down the straight, and he was well weighted yesterday, and it was his day. He tipped out the favourites.
It takes a special horse to win the straight 6, but certainly I'd like to point out that Kiliad, the promising Sydney sprinter, bled during the running of the race and was still only beaten 2 lengths, so that was unfortunate. I think Kiliad would have made it very interesting for Ali
I
Shan.
agree. I think Kiliad was nearly going to win the race, Max.
Well, at beaten 2 lengths and having a bleeding attack, I think that's a pretty good run.
Yeah.
Oh, well, his future now clouded. That's a good point. And Primacy, another terrific run, and Curltreese, well, he may go round in the Linlithgow against Scalacci on Thursday. Maybe Mahogany's got and the Phantom were pretty hard to beat, but for pure drama, this was the run of the day because Mahogany and the Phantom bolted. This is the weight for. Now, Arborea, the winner, is in the white cap, second last into the straight. Alcove looks to have a winning break. Watch Arborea go all over the boat here. Runs in, she's third last, runs out. Shane Dye having all sorts of trouble getting her going. Again about to run in and suddenly produces a whirlwind finish. Max Fine Recipe was also a great run, but it's hard to see this filly now getting beaten in the Oaks on set weights.
Isn't it incredible how Shane Dye has got to be so spectacular? This was just an incredible win. I wonder whether Arborea had to be so far back. Certainly she's the horse to beat in the Oaks because she meets most of her rivals on much better terms. There's no reason why she won't run the Oaks journey. And she's done so well in Melbourne. She's thrived. She was a bag of bones when she got here, but she's a lot more than that now.
Oh, a lot of people improve when they come from Sydney to Melbourne.
Oh, they do, most. Arborea carried the full penalty yesterday, conceding as much as 4.5 kilos to her rivals. She came from last against the racing pattern of the day. She looks unbeatable in the Oaks. She surely will be a short price favourite.
The only thing, Fine Recipe had the same weight, did miss the kick a bit, and also ran a terrific race, and Rose Reward made up big ground.
Well, I hope there are others on Oaks Day that will support rivals of Arborea like you might be, Bruce.
Now, Keith, Love Comes to Town won by 3.5 lengths last year and couldn't win the Oaks, so it's not all over just yet.
Oh, memories, that's last year.
Not all over just yet, but I think we can wait till Thursday, and I'm sure that your huge following will put Arborea up at a point.
We're like the Bobbsey twins this morning, Max, and I haven't got on better with you, Max. Something will break.
Yeah. You've got the same ties on, gentlemen.
Yes, that's the Melbourne Cup tie. We're proud to wear it this week too, Bruce.
Good on you. No, it was a fantastic run by Arborea, and she will be the one to beat. Well, they were the 3 of the big races yesterday. There are a couple of others, the Dalgety and the Mighty McKinnon. We talk about those after the break when we preview next up the Melbourne Cup.
Prime.
What a day it was yesterday. The biggest Derby Day crowd, over 50,000 since the centenary of the Melbourne Cup Carnival in 1860. In 1960, I should say. Gee, 1860. Keith, you were probably only a boy then.
Thanks a lot, Bruce. It was a great crowd and a great day's racing and some great runs produced from a Melbourne Cup viewpoint too.
And speaking of Melbourne Cup, 3 of our special guests, and we will be looking at the international horses and their connections in the next segment. But David Hayes has joined us. David, who has 3 runners in the Melbourne Cup and whose dad won with Belldale Bull and Attalac, 2 imported horses. David, you're a pretty good team. At one stage we looked like you might have 4 or 5. You missed out with Corchaban last night, but your horses are fit and pretty much in form.
Yes, they're in very good form and featured in most of the lead-ups. So traditionally, in the past Cups, you have to run well in the lead-ups to be a chance in the Cup, and most of my horses have.
Azam, Fra and Marrakesh, they've all got one thing in common, haven't they? They're all imported, aren't they?
All imported, and they're, you know, as I said, they're going quite well.
David, a couple of them drew very wide, and Azam drew barrier 1, and he's the one who wanted a wide barrier. It was a topsy-turvy draw for you, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, you know, I would have preferred, you know, the only thing with Farrar, he'll go in very late, and we all know he's a bit of a nutcase in the gates. so he's likely to not have to stand around for too long. But I think in the Melbourne Cup the draws are a little bit irrelevant because they've got a pretty well 1,200 metre run to the first turn.
David, nobody has had the success with imported horses that Lindsay Park has. Drum Tap's vintage crop coming here, having their first run in the Melbourne Cup. Can they win?
I think they can. I just know, I think if you ask the English trainers and when they come in how they would rate those horses compared with, say, a Ferrara in England, there would be no comparison, and it's a pretty well known fact that English stayers are pretty well the best in the world, or European stayers anyway.
Well, we'll talk more about that a little later, but it's a big wrap. Stephen King rode the winner of the Melbourne Cup 2 years ago, Let's Alive. He's on another mare from New Zealand, trained by Bart Cummings, great vintage. Stephen, her run yesterday in the McKinnon.
Yes, Bruce, I was very happy with her run. She, you know, the McKinnon Stakes is usually a good lead-up race to the Melbourne Cup, so I was very happy with the way she got home.
She's well back in the field, which we did expect. Gee, the Phantom was impressive here, wasn't he? He was sitting outside Solvert as they straightened. Fra was in about 4th placing with the blinkers, making a run. Naturalism was struggling, but great vintage getting home, and our Pompeii also a very big run along with our Tristolite. But how do we assess this, Keith and Max? I mean, the Phantom steaming away from Fra, our Pompeii getting going on the inside, our Tristolite, the grey, running on, and great finish. You notice now over the top of Viand across at the end, was able to get past Viand across in the last.
Stephen not using his whip either. It was a big
nice,
run.
Beneficial run. That was a typical Bart Cummings McKinnon run. Back me in the Melbourne Cup written all over it. Tempo of the race, I don't think would have suited great vintage, Stephen, and certainly she got to the line in a manner to suggest that she'll be right down the finish on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's right, Max. You know, the tempo really didn't suit her, but she does give the sign. She's a real 2-miler, so I think she'll run good.
And what about the draw? You're wide. Are you going to go right out the back early?
At the moment, I'm not sure what I'll do. It's not a good barrier, but you know the weight certainly helps. So we'll just see how the race pans out.
Our other special guest is Jim McGrath, an Australian who has really made his mark around the world as one of the great journalists and also broadcasters, the man who broadcast the English Derby and Grand National Steeplechase this year. Jim, welcome back home.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Your feelings about yesterday and the Melbourne Cup prospects that you saw at Flemington?
Well, of course, I've come here knowing vintage crop and knowing drum taps, and having looked at the trials yesterday, I was very impressed with the Phantom, the way he won. I thought he did it very well. I also thought, notwithstanding, later on was a.
But he's missed out, Jim, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So he won't.
I did think that the Phantom, the way he went to the line, was very, very good. You know.
Well, let's have a look at the Dalgety, because that's the other race that is of great interest yesterday. Tennessee Jack had to win to qualify, and he did do just that. He had a beautiful run. He's in the blinkers in 3rd spot. David's horse also had a terrific run, Marrakesh. And David, I thought he might finish over the top of Tennessee Jack in the last field, and he was unable to peg him back.
Yes, I thought he'd win here, but I know he'll be improved vastly by the run. He's just peaking at the right time. He meets Tennessee Jack a little bit better at the weights, and I think there's quite a bit of improvement in this horse.
Tennessee Jack, as you said, Dave, just sprinted away from him, and Marrakesh running into 2nd now in the blue and the white, pulling some ground off him. And you predicted he'll be a much fitter horse on Tuesday.
He will be, and Michael said it was a very good ride by Michael, but with the benefit of the ride and getting to know the horse a bit, he said he would have liked to go on a little bit sooner.
I just wonder about Mick Dittman now. He rode Tennessee Jack, and he also rode our Pompeii earlier in the day. Did anyone have a chance to assess their prospects?
Yeah, Mick Dittman was of the opinion that the McKinnon form was the stronger. However, he did feel that Tennessee Jack would be competitive. I note that Tennessee Jack was wearing bandages
heavily
for the first time yesterday. That's not normally a good sign. I shy off horses that suddenly sprout bandages, but certainly there's plenty of ability there.
Incidentally, Bruce, Mick Dittman was suspended yesterday until November 11, but he has appealed. That appeal will be heard on Friday, and it won't affect his availability to ride in the Cup.
Caulfield Cup's always a great guide, and really when you look at the market here, Fra who won, Air Seattle who was 2nd, the Phantom 3rd, Al Pompeii 4th. They're 4 of the horses, particularly 2, 3 and 4, that are dominating the betting at the moment. Now Air Seattle's the one we probably should concentrate on here. He's about 2nd or 3rd last on the fence in the red colours. He produces a whirlwind finish on a day where it was very hard to make ground. David Hayes' horse, Fra's about to go up and take the lead. Al Pompeii never gets a lot of galloping room free from the right. The Phantom is making his run now. Air Seattle's about to hook out at right angles behind them and really take some ground off. I thought at the time this was the best trial. You certainly did, Max. But, gee, not running yesterday when 17 of the last 20 winners of the Melbourne Cup have run on the Saturday, it's got to be a disadvantage.
Well, David Hayes, just how big a disadvantage is it?
Well, history says that you have to run on Derby Day, but most of the horses that are running in the Cup do run on Derby Day. I know this horse would have had a rousing gallop at Caulfield probably in lieu of it, and then Clary took the horse to the races, so the way he finished on there, I don't think the 2 miles will be any problem.
As a trainer, what's the difference between a rousing gallop and a good hard hit out in a race?
It depends on the horse, really, Bruce. Some horses are very lazy workers and they need a race, and other horses are very genuine workers, and I'm not sure how this horse works, but I wouldn't leave him out just because he didn't run Saturday. You know, a lot of people use the Saturday as their final hit out for the race, and he had it at Caulfield instead of Flemington.
Stephen, Great Vintage apparently hurt her back in the Caulfield Cup. She did slip on the turn. Did you feel she was completely recovered yesterday?
Yes, Bruce, she put up very well. She, in a win, she was very good. I don't think there's any problem with her going into the Cup.
Well, she's got a trainer who's won 9 of them, and he's got a few numbers again this year. It's not a bad record, is it?
And he always likes to race on the Saturday. I did think that Air Seattle was the Melbourne Cup pick after the Caulfield Cup, but I've got to gamble against Air Seattle now. That will make Clary Connors' day, because I also gambled against Mahogany yesterday. But nevertheless, I think that final lead-up race is vital. There's exceptions to all rules. Perhaps Air Seattle will be the exception, but I'll gamble against it.
Bart started with 32 entries in the Melbourne Cup. He's down to 4 in the final fill. Stephen, you were reluctant to make an instant decision on your ride immediately after the McKinnon yesterday. Why the hesitation?
Well, that notwithstanding, trialled very well on the Tuesday, and we put blinkers on him, and we thought he'd overcome laying in. And if he did, he'd be a good ride in the Cup, but he did lay in again yesterday. So.
There's a sort of disguised confident tip for notwithstanding, and I fell into it after that. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Just finally, David, in summary, if you had to pick one of your 3 for the people all around Australia that are dying to have a bet.
I would say if the track's good or dead, I would back Farrar, and if the track's good or fast, I'd back Marrakesh of mine, and if it's slow, back Azam. So there's a 3-pronged tip there.
Well, that's easy to follow. And Stephen, jockeys are not allowed to tip, I know, but you won with Let's Low. But you've got anywhere near the confidence you had with her 2 years ago?
I think this Great Vintage is more of a Dow stayer. She's definitely she grinds away, but I think over the 2 miles she's going to be a great chance, so just hopefully the rain will keep away.
Fair enough. Good luck, Stephen. Good luck, David. It's the biggest day in their year, the Melbourne Cup Day. Jim's going to stay with us. We're going to talk about the internationals coming up after this. History is often made, certainly legends are made on the first Tuesday of November, but it is historic this year. For the first time in 133 years, a couple of horses have come out here and they're having their first starts in Australia in the Cup as fully imported horses. Drum Taps and Vintage Crop. And who knows, this Melbourne Cup eventually could become the staying championship of the world. Let's have a look at the 2 horses in their preparations.
It's taken the VRC more than 5 years to persuade some of the leading overseas owners and trainers to bring their best performers to Australia for the race that stops the nation. And the club couldn't have wished for 2 better horses. Dual Ascot Gold Cup winner Drum Taps and Irish St Ledger winner Vintage Crop. Both regarded as among the best stayers in Europe, they've made the journey to contest our most famous race. It's not the first time an imported horse has run or even won the Cup. However, it is the first time 2 horses have come to this race without any preparation, other than their recent racing overseas. According to VRC racing manager Les Benton, the whole exercise has been a logistical nightmare, which will serve as a useful guide to future Melbourne Cup invitations.
We had to fulfil a number of criteria points that the Australian Quarantine Inspection Service gave to us, and we've done all that. We maintained Sandown as a private quarantine facility and went to lengths to ensure that we had proper security. We have vets there every day checking on the horses, and there are quite a lot of things we had to do to ensure that the horses would be ready to race here. The whole thing about this exercise is that if they do perform well, the Melbourne Cup may become the staying championship of the world. It will internationalise the race, and I can see in future years many other horses coming.
Drum Taps came out of quarantine on Tuesday morning and was taken for his first look at Flemington. There were plenty of local racing people keen to have a look at the 8-year-old stallion, who was given a hit out around the famous course by Brent Thompson. Drum Taps didn't disappoint. He ran the last 600 metres in 38.6 seconds, working with the David Hayes-trained galloper Take Home Pay.
He could have easily beaten him by much further.
Meanwhile, Vintage Crop remained at Sandown. Like his compatriot, he was closely watched by the racing fraternity. He also looked forward in condition, giving a strong indication of his ability as a stayer. VRC handicapper Jim Bowler says the task of handicapping overseas horses is made easier by comparing their form with other imported horses, like Runyon, which have already raced here.
The English handicappers gave me a relativity between Drum Taps, Vintage Crop and Vintage Crop to Runyon that I was able to work with, and then it was a matter of placing them in order with the Australian horses and New Zealand horses.
VRC handicapper Jim Bowler, and it's a great deal of pleasure that we welcome the trainers of the two horses. Firstly, Lord Huntingdon. Welcome, William Hastings-Bass, as we knew you once a few years ago, William.
Thank you.
Welcome to the program.
It's good to be here on a great occasion.
The trainer of Drum Taps, and next to you, Dermot World, the trainer of Vintage Crop. Welcome as well, Dermot.
Thank you, Bruce.
Gee, Vintage Crop, Dermot, it's been responsible for two of the biggest plunges in the history of British racing, and the Zarowich 25s into 5s when he won, and the Irish St Leger, they reckon they nearly closed the bookies' doors. They couldn't pay out. Are we expecting something like this? We've heard about Kerry Packer yesterday, something like this on Tuesday?
Well, he's got a much tougher assignment on Tuesday, and a lot will depend on how he is acclimatised.
Well, how do you think he has?
I'm satisfied. I would have preferred to have another week, but I'm happy with the horse.
Dermot, your horse Vintage Crop has been less public than Drum Taps. Does that, well, it got some talk going that all was not well. Is that the case?
No, I'm happy with the horse. Initially, he lost about 7 kilos, and he was slow to eat. And this was just a process that was going to take time for him to adapt. As I said, I would rather have another week, but we're happy with the horse.
We just saw pictures of him working this morning. What sort of workout did he have at Sandown?
He worked over a mile this morning. He wasn't asked to do anything over strenuous, but we're satisfied.
Dermot, when he's at home, does he do as little as he has done here, or how do you prepare him there?
No, he would normally do a lot more, Jim. Mm-hmm. I've had to be extra careful with him because it was a balancing act of trying to get my horse fit and trying to encourage him to eat and to put on weight. Mm-hmm. So it was a difficult task for this race. Normally he would do a lot more work.
Mm-hmm. William, what about Drum Taps? You're coming a little bit later than Dermot with your commitments in Europe, but his work at Flemington particularly midweek seemed to impress so many people.
Well, David Hayes was very kind and lent us horse to work with. He's followed the same sort of pattern I'd normally follow back in England, and giving him a work on a racecourse 8 to 10 days before he runs. I think with all the media attention here, he got the impression that it was actually a racecourse, and so worked a little bit sharper than he might have done back home without the media attention.
William, the only time we've been able to gauge Drum Taps against Australasian horses was in the 1991 Japan Cup. He finished 6 lengths behind Shaftesbury Avenue, who was 3rd, and 4.5 lengths behind Rough Habit, who was 5th. Was there any excuse for him on that day when he was in their wake?
He did come out of the race with a pulled muscle. I felt that he wouldn't have won the race. He's always beaten Rockhopper at level weights before, and given that excuse with the pulled muscle behind, and he was lame for 3 or 4 days after it, I think that probably the best we could have finished would have been 4th or 5th. But fortunately, the Japan Cup's over 1.5 miles, and the Melbourne Cup happens to be over a little bit further, which I think will help to give us the edge anyway. I mean, he's a better stayer than he is a 1.5 mile horse.
Gentlemen, let me congratulate you on your choice of finishing school. Of course, you went to Tommy Smith at Tulloch Lodge to gain some knowledge about racing, which is always a good thing. Come to Melbourne and get the money, but if you want to learn anything, go to Sydney. William,
don't take any notice of that.
The quality of stayer at Flemington yesterday, how would you gauge it? Would you say, would that be up to British standard, overseas standard?
I think that the best judge of that probably was Frankie Dettori, who rode Landowner in the McKinnon. He was very impressed by the quality of horses there. I mean, Dermot and I have, as you said, been to Australia. I also spent some time with Bart and with Colin Hayes, and we all know, Australians know very well, and us visiting Brits who are in racing know that the quality of horses here is very, very, very high.
Yes, the difference, of course, and we heard the panel earlier speaking about the prospects of Air Seattle may have taken a downturn because he's missed a run since the Caulfield Cup. Your horses will not have raced for 49 days. Jim McGrath, you're best placed to answer this question that has been the most asked one. Can the horses come into our Melbourne Cup 49 days without a race? You've seen it both ways.
Well, I think George Hanlon made the best point yesterday. He said that there's plenty of ways of training a horse, and you don't have to have runs at set times of the year, but he said that the most important thing is to keep a horse happy, and these guys know how to keep their horses happy. And I think the important thing to remember is that both of these gentlemen do know their horses. William has had drum taps for quite a time, and Dermot's had vintage crops, so they know what they've followed a certain regime, and I think you've got to respect that, and I think that they would have a chance.
Jim, a lot's been said about the handicap. We're looking at drum taps at the moment, and look at his record, 2 Ascot Gold Cups, 5th in the equivalent of the Cox Plate. I hope that's not being irreverent to mention the Cox Plate in the same terms as the King George VI.
It's a fair
We reckon that's fair enough.
Yeah.
And a lot of prize money, 15 out of 31. 3 kilos the difference between them. If you were handicapping them on what you've seen in Britain, is that a fair assumption?
I think the most interesting thing about that is that when Drum Taps won the Gold Cup, it was the ground was on the soft side. And Vintage Crop didn't really handle it. He finished a long way behind him. In the Orison Ledger, I didn't really think that Drum Taps was anywhere near his best at all, and I think we should best forget that run. So looking at their very best runs, I would say that Drum Taps, I would favour him ahead of Vintage Crop. But having said that, Drum Taps is an established horse. He's had all the form. We know exactly what he is. Now he's not that much improvement in him ability-wise. Vintage Crop, strangely enough, being a 7-year-old, I still think that we haven't really got to the bottom of him.
Well, he's only had a few starts, hasn't he? 15 starts.
It's incredible.
You mentioned the Ledger. We're about to show the concluding stages. This is the last run the 2 horses had. Vintage Crop coming away from some very good horses. Assessor went on and won the St Ledger, didn't he, in France after this? And Drum Taps is floundering a bit with a shadow roll in his green and white colours in about 6th place.
You've got to remember, Drum Taps went to the front. He went to the front and he ran a big race until the turn, and he just blew up, in my opinion. Vintage Crop, as you said, backed for a fortune that day. And Dermot didn't miss at all. I think he walked away with bags full. You know, it was a first-class performance. You look at his performance there, the Cesarewitch, when he won that race at Newmarket last year, he took a long time to get going. I thought he took a full furlong to get going from about the 6 furlong marker. Walter Swinburne, who rode him that day, was very worried at that time. He gave him a bit of a scare. Once he got rolling, he absolutely blitzed them. That was a handicap, so in 12 months that horse has improved out of sight. I think he's improved about 5 kilos in that time. So he's still improving.
I wonder, he could run in the Cup hurdle early on too, because he's a hurdler. Wasn't he, Dermot? He won 2 hurdle races.
Oh, yes, he's extremely good jumper. And,
well, I think, Dermot, this would be the perfect answer to people who believe that he hasn't had, long enough time between races or short enough time between races.
The jockeys, I know they're brilliant jockeys, Dettori and Canane, marvellous jockeys. Will there be a problem here, do you think, Jim?
I think that anybody who's worried about the jockeys is worrying unnecessarily. Frankie Dettori is the biggest young name in the ranks there. He's the best talent since Pat Edry to come along. He's the man everybody wants freelance-wise over in Europe. And Mick Canane, his record speaks for itself. I mean, he's won the Derby this year, the Eclipse, everything he steps on seems to win. These boys are riding against the best in America, Europe, every day. They'll adapt, and they've both ridden in Hong Kong, where they've ridden against the best of Australian jockeys. So, really, there's no worries on that score.
Well, Dermot, you particularly, I'm not sure if William's a big better or not, but you particularly want to have a look at the market, I know. Here we go. We're giving you a hard time this morning, and why not? Our Pompey and the Phantom are equal favourites at the moment at 5-1. Their barrier alongside of them, both drawn wide. Air Seattle got the best of the barriers. With Tennessee Jack, they're at 8-1 with Great Vintage, and both your horses well on the market. Drum Taps, Vintage Crop. Jim, I'll ask you first. Do you think they can run a place? Do you think either of them could win?
I think it's very possible that, I think that they'll both figure in the first 4. I'm confident enough of that. And I think that Drum Taps might even win. I think Vintage Crop could run in the first 4.
Well, I'm tipping Air Seattle. Despite the fact that he didn't run yesterday, I thought he was the best run in the Caulfield Cup.